Hello, hello, welcome, welcome. How is everybody doing today? Please feel free to use the chat to tell us where you're joining us from. So this is a webinar co-hosted by us at Conserve and Katerina, Laina, and Tamar Maor from KuraLab. Well, we've got some people from Quebec, Texas, New York City, New York, Mexico City. We've got people from all over the place.
Amazing.
Welcome. Kat and Tamar are joining us from the UK. Are you guys in London?
Yes, we are.
That's wonderful. Toronto. Wow. Well, welcome, welcome. We're going to get this. I'm going to start by introducing our presenters today, and then we'll get started with this awesome topic. We at Conserve really believe in data, and KuraLab is a specialist company in understanding that data. So we're going to get some awesome insights from them. Really excited to get this started. So Katerina is, her career spans over 2 decades in conservation and heritage management, combining deep subject expertise with operational acumen. Having worked in every role from bench conservator to strategic lead, she has gained holistic understanding of how collections function, evolve, and endure. She has led transformation programs, developed long-term conservation strategies for both public and private collections, and is now applying that experience to create scalable, digital-first solutions that bring museum standard care to the private sector. And Tamar is a sculpture and objects conservator with over 2 decades of experience translating technical expertise into practical preventive solutions for collections in both public and private contexts. Her career spans hands-on conservation, research, and leadership from a decade as a sculpture conservator at Tate, where she developed pioneering treatment methods in collaboration with leading artists, to directing TM Art Conservation, an international practice based in London and Houston. Tamar's portfolio reflects a commitment to innovation through material understanding, collaboration, and cross-disciplinary exchange. And together they started KuraLab, which is an eco-conscious collection care consultancy that provides expert guidance and customized collection preservation strategies. It leverages digital tools and sustainable practice to offer high quality, tailored preservation solutions for collectors, corporations, and institutions, ensuring that heritage assets remain protected for future generations. So, very important work that you guys are doing. And just a note, during the presentation, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We will be answering questions at the end, but we would love to have a discussion at that point if you have any questions. So please feel free to drop those there. And I will let you guys take it away.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much for the introduction. It's great to be here. I'll start with the big picture. The shift from conservation to preservation isn't a new idea, but rather a realignment of priorities, and meaningful data is what helps drive and sustain that change. Our sector has evolved to recognize that care isn't defined by how skillfully we repair, but by how effectively we prevent. When preservation is embedded intelligently into daily operations, it allows us to safeguard more of our collections with the same or even fewer resources. It's an evolution of necessity, one that calls for evidence-based decision-making at every level, where choices about environment, display, and maintenance are guided by insight rather than assumption. Why meaningful data matters? For conservators, archivists, and curators alike, this means using evidence to anticipate change rather than reacting to damage. A shift from remedial action to informed foresight. Meaningful data makes this possible. It supports budget efficiency, reduces energy waste, strengthens accountability, and enables flexibility across teams. In short, it turns preservation from a reactive process into a strategic practice. So, what does this look like in practice? Embedding data-driven insight begins with consistency, establishing clear, repeatable reporting practices that present environmental and condition data in ways that can be compared over time. These reports should move beyond raw reading to highlight trends, risks, and priorities, creating a shared foundation for decision making. Importantly, what these reports include and how their findings are interpreted should be shaped collaboratively by all stakeholders, guided by the preventive conservator. When conservation, curatorial, archival, and operational teams align around a shared evidence base, data becomes more than a record. It becomes a common language for planning, accountability, and sustainable preservation. Let's examine why these demands of our profession and why those demands are essential. Heritage contributes billions to national GDP, yet the funds to protect it continues to contract. A single conservation project can consume what might otherwise sustain years of preventive work. When we rebalance towards prevention, guided by data and risk assessment, every budget line stretches further and the need for costly intervention declines. This chart from the Campaign for the Arts illustrates a clear pattern across the last two spending reviews, UK spending reviews. In 2024, overall government spending rose by 5.4%, while funding for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport fell by 6.2%. In 2025, spending again increased by 1.5% overall, but again for the Department of Culture, Media and Sports, saw another real term cut of 1.4%. Even as public expenditure grows, investment in culture, media, and heritage continues to decline, suggesting the sector is being deprioritized at a time when other departments are expanding. This is our financial reality, at least in the UK, for the foreseeable future. We are called to do the same and even more with less. Therefore, we need to make informed decisions and prioritize appropriately will come from the evidence data we will gather and the meaningful interpretation which is required to push forward. Faced with this financial reality, we have to think differently about impact. The focus can no longer be on how much we spend, but on how intelligently we spend it. The Guggenheim Museum Bilbao shows this logic in action. By broadening its internal climate ranges and tracking data in real time, it reduced gas use by 30% and electricity by 6%, saving around 20,000 euros per month. Prevention isn't a cheaper substitute for conservation. It's what makes conservation sustainable. Preventive conservation protects collections by addressing risk before damage happens, safeguarding both heritage and financial investment. The Horizon Programme 2025 states that every £1 spent on prevention can save £4 to £5 in future restoration costs. The informed way forward is through data and analysis to preserve value before loss occurs. For collection managers, this translates directly into budget efficiency and defensible prioritization of maintenance over emergency repairs. Practical ways to embed data-driven insights include integrating consistent and comparable reporting into regular building health checks. These structured reviews feed directly into routine maintenance cycles, guiding priorities, cost, and risk planning. By making reporting a core part of operational review, not an afterthought, institutions can link environmental performance, material condition, and resource allocation in a single evidence-based framework. In doing so, data becomes an active tool for efficient resource management, ensuring maintenance decisions are proactive, transparent, and strategically aligned rather than purely reactive. Let's move now to the environmental context. The energy crisis exposed just how fragile our old assumptions about climate control really were. The well-known 50% relative humidity plus minus 5 and 18 degrees Celsius plus minus 2 guidelines have been heavily implemented for decades, and the cost implications of those tight parameters are now clear. Institutions like the Getty Conservation Institute and the BSOT Group, through its Green Protocol, have reminded us that stability, not perfection, should guide preservation. Endorsed by major organizations such as State and the V&A, and now adopted by many smaller regional archives, museums, and historic properties, the BSOT protocol promotes evidence-based broader environmental ranges, typically 40 to 60% relative humidity and 16 to 25 degrees Celsius. This is exactly the model followed in Bilbao, where the data-led, risk-aware, and energy-efficient approach achieved remarkable results. The key word here is balance. But balance can look different for different cultural institutions, hence the importance of evidence-based data. As projected, temperature increases based on multiple climate models, as you can see on the graph. We are reminded that sustainability is not an external agenda. It's a core professional responsibility. It positions collection care within the wider sustainability agenda, and it's endorsed by the UK Spending Review 2025 and Horizon Europe Cluster 2 priorities. For collection managers, this flexibility enables smarter HVAC operation that protects diverse collections without unnecessary energy use. Flexible parameters also expand the scope for lawns and displays without compromising safety. These preventive strategies directly supporting net zero and resource efficiency objectives. And I'm reiterating that sustainability isn't an external agenda. It's integral to our professional responsibility. Now, practical ways to embed data-driven insight into sustainable collection. Management start with using environmental evidence to inform smarter, more flexible HVAC operation. By analyzing consistent temperature and humidity data, teams can define tolerance ranges that maintain object safety while reducing unnecessary energy consumption. These data-informed parameters can be integrated into building management systems and law planning, ensuring that energy efficiency never compromises preservation. Embedding sustainability within policy and maintenance planning rather than treating it as a separate agenda reinforces professional responsibility and demonstrates measurable impact. When evidence drives environmental control, preservation and sustainability move in tandem.
The data problem and the short-term trap. The greatest risk often lies in short-sightedness, allowing immediate pressures to dictate long-term decisions. We tighten HVAC settings just to be safe, postpone monitoring contracts, or trim maintenance budgets. Each act seems small, but collectively they erode effectiveness. The BISO protocol challenges that mindset. It asks institutions to act proportionately, guided by evidence rather than fear. Short-term fixes might keep us compliant, but they rarely keep us effective. Every postponed pest inspection or rehousing project adds invisible cost later. Preventive budgets typically represent less than 10% of total conservation spending. Easy to defer, but every deferred task compounds future remedial cost. We all recognize the value of data, yet having data and understanding it are not the same. Reliable, consistent, continuous information reveals patterns rather than snapshots. What we need is better data, systematic, trustworthy, and accessible across teams. Once data reaches that standard, it stops being background noise and becomes genuine evidence for decision making. Our profession excels at observation, but interpretation demands time, continuity, and context. Larger institutions can sustain this. Smaller ones, often relying on freelance support, cannot always manage. Without consistent interpretation, information becomes archived rather than acted upon. Observe, analyze, decide, and act. When interpretation becomes routine, data fulfills its real purpose, not as documentation of past, but as intelligence for estates, sustainability, and finance teams, turning preservation into a collective responsibility. This reflects the preventive strategies mainstreamed through the BISO protocol, using data to quantify risk and justify proportionate defensible decisions. For smaller organizations, consistent monitoring supported by accessible interpretation provides continuity that limited staffing cannot. Over time, it builds a living preservation plan, a record of performance and response. In the absence of a permanent department, the data itself becomes institutional memory. This continuity allows museums like Bilbao to measure and maintain progress towards sustainability goals year after year. Why meaningful data matters. For archives and small museums, this record becomes the bridge between changing personnel and consistent standards, ensuring accountability and confidence with lenders and funders alike. For archives and small museums, practical ways to embed data-driven insight focus on creating consistent, well-documented records that endure beyond individual roles. Regular standardized reporting acts as a bridge between changing personnel, ensuring that institutional knowledge is retained and professional standards remain stable over time. When environmental and condition data are presented clearly and archived systematically, they become both a tool for internal accountability and a source of confidence for external partners, from lenders and funders to governing bodies. Embedding these reporting practices into routine workflows safeguards continuity, strengthens trust, and demonstrates that even with limited resources, transparency and rigor can sustain professional credibility. No single tool or discipline can manage the full chain from collection to action. Conserve delivers autonomous, reliable monitoring. KuraLab transforms that information into interpretation and strategy. Together, they create a continuous preservation loop: measurement, understanding, and response. Technology supports expertise. Collaboration builds resilience. This model scales from national museums to regional archives and private collectors, providing each with the same transparent, verifiable data foundation. The shift from conservation to preservation is not a replacement of practice, but a rebalance between intervention and prevention, heritage and sustainability, data, and judgment. KuraLab and Conserve show how technology and interpretation make that philosophy practical. The challenge ahead is to preserve not only objects, but capacity, ensuring our systems and institutions remain adaptive. Whether you manage a single archive room or a national collection, the shift to preservation begins with interpreting your own data. Budgeting resources for monitoring, environmental control, and interpretation is a strategic investment. Studies by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts underscore the importance of including preservation as a core line item in every annual budget. Preservation is no longer an optional add-on. It's the operating system that keeps collections and organizations resilient. Thank you so much for your time and for attending our webinar. Thanks also to Conserve for hosting, and of course to Carly for mediating it. We welcome any questions you may have. Please feel free to ask now or to email us directly. You can use the QR codes here.
Well, that was fabulous. We actually do have a question from Francesco, who says, you mentioned that data constitutes the institutional memory, which I agree. However, there's a big issue of the support on which such data is stored. Previously paper, then magnetic, and then optical supports, today cloud. How would you imagine a future strategy to preserve such an institutional memory?
I guess it's all about, evolving with technology, right? We have to find ways to consolidate all those different ways, all these different inputs into one system that understands it all. And there are initiatives trying to do just that. And Conserve also does the same thing, trying to bring from different systems data together. So although it might seem that it's slow, there are a lot of initiatives already happening to be able to consolidate that.
I would say, from Conserve standpoint, there is a free tool available that you can start importing data into, whether you're using legacy data loggers or we have products as well, but there is a free version. You can play around with it, and it does store everything over time, and you can log events that happen. That would be, that's obviously a somewhat biased answer, but there are other tools available as well. And another question, how much of an RH swing over how long do you consider dangerous? Good question. This is from Michaela.
Oh, Michaela, I wish I had a standard answer, but this is what we are trying to avoid. We're just trying to avoid standardizing something that could be different from my collection versus your collection. I guess what you should be thinking is what the tolerance range that you can allow per your collection. And in order to do that, you have to evaluate different things like your building, the room, the usage, the collection, of course, the collection type, and then find a range that works for you. If I tell you maintain XYZ, it might not be applicable at all, although academically correct, might not be applicable to you at all. So that's why we're talking about starting by interpreting your own data. You have the answer. The others are just going to help you to maybe action it. But it's very, very difficult. And we shouldn't say this is the only answer, because this is what happened for many, many years with these tight parameters that we've all adhered to religiously, and where that brought us.
And I'd say that's true. So we have an anonymous question that came in. What do you think are the biggest barriers that still prevent organizations from turning monitoring data into actionable decisions?
Well,
You want to start?
I don't mind. Go ahead. Yeah.
Right. I'll say that one of the main barriers is interpretation. That is not enough just to collect the data, as we talked about. Is we need a framework to translate those numbers into actionable points. So definitely one barrier is interpreting it, 100%. Consistency and continuity. This is what we've been saying. You have to carry on doing that all the time, continuously. Any breaking of that in a way not destroys fully, but definitely dilutes the quality of the data. And as far as I remember, also Conserve, you do have a system where it can connect data that they have been interrupted, if I remember correctly. So there is some sort of
Yes.
continuity. So definitely continuity is another barrier. And one last thing that I would like to say as a fellow practical conservator is that please allow your preventive conservator some headspace to think what they need to do and to interpret the data. We are taking for granted that, the human element, oh yeah, they can do all sorts of things. Give them some headspace. Preservation is all about critical thinking. And if you don't have the headspace to do that, it's very difficult.
And it's hard to do when you've got 900 other things going
And
on.
you're stressed in so many different directions. Yes. Others want to add anything else?
No, do you think, I don't know, it reiterates, I think, what we've discussed in in our webinar that, we're trying to make the data meaningful. And so building that interpretation and, the continuity that Kat discussed helps to give you the information that you need to make actionable decisions.
Sure. So we have another question from, is it Genevieve or Genevieve, depending on where she's from. I really appreciate the value of sustainability expanding to include the capacity of staff as well as our building and systems. I'm not sure if this is quantifiable, but do you have any ideas to express this value to administration?
That's why we're starting with environmental data. It has been, and it is still a challenge, how to quantify value and impact of the heritage world into the boardrooms and into, budget holders and leaders. So starting small, it's actually very important. And data is the only thing that we can access, that we can use, and we can interpret. And that could be our guiding force, and that in a way will give us a seat on the table because we are talking with evidence. So
Yeah.
data is definitely a small opening to the door, which could be later on a big push.
For sure.
Yeah, and I encourage you to look at the kind of the study done in Bilbao and how they really, there's more statistics that we didn't include in our presentation that may give you more insight on the answers to your questions and kind of quantify that.
And we'll be sending this presentation, the deck and a recording out after we're done. So there is a citation there that you can look at the full study there. It's pretty fascinating. So we have another anonymous question. Many smaller institutions or private collectors don't have the same infrastructure as major museums. What are some realistic first steps that they can take to start embedding data-led preventive care into their workflows?
So, yeah, sure. I think, again, it's starting small but consistently, right? All you need is maybe one monitor in a choice location, and you can start to collect single reliable data in that space rather than having like a bunch of inconsistent monitoring that doesn't really give you the consistency that we're discussing. And that will allow you to prioritize your risks. and focus on the vulnerabilities of the collection.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Sometimes, less is more, just one data logger in a crucial space with vulnerable items or with usage that is beyond the norm can actually tell you more than, as you said, having too many and not being able to do anything with them.
And accessibility of the, the information and and using the tools, right? Like using what we're talking about here, the data and the insights that it can provide you. So, just really keeping things simple and consistent and starting small.
When you say consistent or, there can't be any gaps, like what does that mean? Like, does it need to be recorded every minute, every hour, every day, every week? Like, how consistent is consistent?
Consistent, I mean, it's your choice, and it has to do with, again, the space that you have, the collection that you have, if you want to take measurements every 1 minute or every 10 minutes. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you will carry on taking data for months, and months can be turned into years, because what you are seeking is also seasonal changes. It's the difference between monitoring for 2 months, thinking, but I've been doing it continuously for 2 months. Well, the year has 12 and the season is changing. So it's not very consistent. But if you are monitoring for 3 years in a row, you have a much better understanding of how season influence your collection and what kind of cycles you should expect, either for pest management or for relative humidity and temperature fluctuations, all of these things. Or light, exactly. So it's not how you will set up your monitors to record, is that you will do the recording of whatever you decide. I mean, some small organizations, they want to do it every 20 minutes because that gives battery a bit of a breathing space, and they don't have to change it that often because they don't have the resources to do it. Great. But can they just do it continuously for a year and a second year? That's what matters.
And that allows you to see also not just seasonal changes, but trends according to when different things are happening in the museum or in the building or in the space, right? And we can see events and correlate that with data.
Can you give any examples of some of these events that you might have found in somebody's data? You mentioned having institutional legacy or recording or history. What are some examples of some of these trends that you've noticed? And were there any actions that could be taken to help with those kinds of swings or trends or lack of trends?
Many examples. So let's start with some. I mean, without naming institutions or anything, but it has happened, for example, to see on my data great peaks, and you're thinking, why this is happening? This is a storage space. Everything is stable. Nobody's accessing it. What's wrong? And then when we do the monthly and quarterly reporting, because that's how I set it up, we've actually seen that at that point, there was a problem in one of our storage spaces that in a way made a very large group of engineers working in that space for a few days. And instantly we've seen that on our data. Now, when I see the peak, you can assume, maybe it's a malfunction, something is happening. And this is where consistency in reporting comes handy. I noted straight away that peak is unusual, is not going to affect the collection that much. It was one-off event because of engineering work happening in that space. It didn't affect anything else, but the presence of people in that storage area actually created that peak. And the same thing could be with events. I mean, and at Tate, we've seen that many, many times, having a lot of people in specific galleries, then all the data suddenly they just go up. Yes, of course. And then you look for trends. Is it raining that day? Do they bring coats in there? Do they bring bags? I mean, how all these external,
Yeah.
what is the word that I'm looking for? All these external issues,
Criteria.
the reading.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could be a lot.
I saw it in a historic property where all of a sudden there would be these peaks of relative humidity, and it turned out that they were hosting a yoga class in the library space and had a giant tea urn that was just billowing humid air into the library space. And I thought, let's make a suggestion that we have our tea and our coffee in a different space after yoga. And it's just kind of linking those things together and then making small changes that don't, it has a great positive impact on the collection and not a massive impact on the public enjoyment.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's funny what can change data.
Yeah, oh my God, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this is why reporting is important, and try to think beyond of that peak that you see in front of you. There was one specific situation where senior management was alerted, oh my God, the relative humidity is above 60. We should anticipate mold. Let's throw lots of money to fix the problem. And I'm like, hold on, wait. We have the 60, which is 100% a risk, because we know that above 60 we see mold, absolutely. But why exactly it happened and where it happened, and if the collection is boxed and what type of box it has, all of this will influence of, okay, do I have to have a reactive response to it? I panic, throw money, solve the problem, or just pause and think, wow, okay, is this normal? How long we've been having 60? I had collections that they've been on 60 relative humidity for years and no mold happened. And I had others that within 48 hours, they start, you can start seeing spots. So there are a lot of parameters that you have to include in your thinking. And that's why I'm going back to my beloved preventive conservators. Just give them time to absorb and understand exactly what they are observing and make an interpretation for it.
That's such a valuable point. Luisa, actually, it's kind of a question, kind of a comment. As a conservator, I wish there was an accepted formula, such as like one conservator per 3 curators. Do you have a recommendation on that kind of ratio or anything like that?
I will say 3 conservators for 1 curator, but then my fellow curator friends will get upset. There isn't a golden ratio. I think it goes back to how you manage your time as a preventive conservator. If you've been dragged and you allow that to happen, you won't be effective. But if you strategize and you have a sense of where you're heading and what you're trying to achieve, then it doesn't matter if you have 1 or 2 conservators, you're on the right path and you will just achieve what you want to achieve. So the strategy is very, very important rather than just ad hoc actions.
Sure. So we have one more anonymous question. It looks like sustainability targets and digital tools are evolving at a rapid rate. Do you see any next major opportunities for innovation in preventive conservation, whether it's technology, collaboration, or mindset shift?
I think
all of them we need all of them. Absolutely.
But I would say a mindset shift is really critical, right? We need to move from kind of reactive conservation and start focusing on predictive preservation. And, the technology can support us in doing that and making that data transparent, and interpreting that data allows the interpretation and the
And also, I mean, just don't be afraid to lean into other disciplines. I mean, it could be technology, it could be, I don't know, management, it could be whatever. It's the combination and how you're using that is available to you. That's why we say we start with mindsets. If your mindset is that I will work collaboratively with others because we have a same goal, which is looking after the collection, which I know that every conservator is super passionate about, yay. That's a very good way to do it. Change your mindset, reach out, use technology, experiment with technology. It works for you, great. It doesn't work, another one. And this is how you move on.
It's a great answer. So I don't have any more questions that are popping up. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's fine with us. Any other closing thoughts, remarks from the audience or from you guys? This was wonderful. I think that this was super helpful information. I think that a lot of us are in the habit of collecting data. And so this gives us at least something to think about in terms of like, okay, now what do we do with that data? So that's awesome.
Yeah. And again, like we're here and we're trying to bring that to the wider heritage.
Yeah. Starts out.
Yes. And if you need support with that interpretation, then we'd love to help you.
Absolutely.
Sure. And that is a good note that we at Conserve and at KuraLab are here to support you all. If you are collecting data and you are either overwhelmed by it or concerned about it, confused about it, have questions about it, please connect with us. And we have services and offerings to help with that. So we're happy to be of support in that way.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
All right,
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you all for attending. We're going to wrap it up. And like I said, we will share the deck. We will share the recording. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please email us, use the QR codes on the screen, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.